We then went on to discuss different types of evidence in the second lecture, the differences between subjective and objective approach. And last week we talked about the introduction to divine indications and how it works and how they're built. Somebody can mute themselves there. I think there's I don't know who that is. If you aren't talking, please mute yourself. Let me see here. Okay, there. I think it's under control now. There we go. So, I wanted to clarify something that's been recurring in some of the discussion questions. Last week when we talked about the question of shifting the burden of proof and who has the burden of proof. So some of you in the emails, I think maybe part of it is my fault that maybe I didn't make the question specific enough because I really wasn't looking for the differences between the burden of proof between evolution and intelligent design. I was more focused on what we talked about in the lecture, which was spontaneous generation versus intelligent design. Because I wasn't really getting into the issue of evolution. Within evolution itself, there's many things that you can see, many animals that are similar and things that could have developed from one to the other. And that's not really what the issue is or what the questions that we were discussing. We were really discussing on the issue of the origin. Right. So just to clarify again, the reason my contention is that the intelligent design argument shifts the burden of proof as it relates to spontaneous generation is because, as we stated, when we see something that is complex, we understand just from logic, from things that we see in the world, things that are complex usually had some kind of forethought and design in them, right? We don't see that a microphone or something that has any type of complexity could have spontaneously generated. And that's really what we're asked to believe when we look at Professor Wald and some things that we talked about last week, is that scientists cannot explain how complicated molecules formed. And in order to have organisms, you need complicated molecules. And there's no explanation for how that could happen without some type of forethought, intelligence, design. Rather, they're asking us to believe that it is random. And that's where the argument really comes in, that if you want to tell me that everything that I see in the world, I see that my logic, my common sense tells me that when something is complex, there was some type of forethought here. This didn't just happen by itself. And you're asking me to believe that this entire world and all the animals and an eye, right, they just somehow spontaneously generated after billions of years, or however you want to phrase it. I mean, they usually put it with time, right? If you give something enough time, it gets there. Then the burden is on you to show that, because we see that that is not the case in the world. So I wanted to clarify that because I got some responses that were talking specifically on evolution, and we need to go back to the original question of how could we arrived at organisms for them to evolve even, and that's really where it was. So anyways, with all of that, that was just a note I wanted to some feedback I wanted to give on some of the discussion questions. And without further ado, I want to get into today's lecture. And we are here finally after the three lectures that kind of gave us a basis for what we're going to be talking about. Divine Indications Part 1, which today is going to be exploring scientific knowledge in ancient Jewish texts that predates human discovery by centuries. So, the first thing I want to talk about, and I'm kind of going also in order of what I believe to be the strength of the different indications. So as you'll see, the first one that we get into, we're going to be talking about the number of stars. I see this one as a more general kind of piece of evidence indication to just kind of get our thoughts going in the direction. And that's also why you see I have my nice space background today, as we talked about earlier, because we're going to be talking about some stars and lunar cycle. So I always like this background, and I asked myself, when will I ever get to use it? And I finally found a situation where it's appropriate. So let's get into our first piece of evidence. Remember, we're building a cumulative case here. The Talmud actually says that when you're making an argument, like whether any type of logical argument or in a proof of some sort, if you're trying to prove an halachic matter, or you're trying even like in court when I would argue in front of a judge, you want to go from evidence that is less strong and build to the stronger. You don't want to put your strongest evidence first and then go back and talk about weaker forms of evidence because it's not as okay. What are you talking to me about this? You're already I'm stuck on the stronger one already. What are you going backwards, right? So the whole course is kind of built that way, and so is the book. Whereas I believe that the divine indications chapters they become more they're stronger types of evidence as we move forward and along. So this first piece of evidence I want us to consider is that under very dark skies and remote locations on Earth, about 8,400 stars are visible to the naked eye. That's true today. I mean, it depends where you live. If you're in the city, out in the desert, maybe you can see more. But 8,400 is pretty much the most you could sit and count without any type of instrument or telescope. Now, in the Talmud, remember now we're talking about something that the Talmud was canonized about 1500 years ago, and that's not something that's really debatable. That's just and for all intents and purposes, that's a date that is agreed upon. The Talmud presents a vastly different number, as we'll see here in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Masechet Brachot, Tractate Brachot, page 32. And this is what the Talmud says. It says, "The Holy One, blessed is he, said, My daughter Israel, 12 signs I created in the heavens. And on every sign and sign I created 30 chayil. And on every chayil I created 30 legion. And every 30 legion," and again, these names of legion, chayil, raton that we're counting, they're really types of groups that would be like I'd say in a military type system. Like I created soldiers, and above them they're commanding officers, and above them the superior officers. These are the Aramaic word for these types of groups that are grouped one within another. So 30 chayil and on them 30 legion, and on 30 legion 30 raton, and on them 30 gistra. And then here's the catch. I placed, literally hung, is the Aramaic word is hung, 365 alfei ribo. Alfei ribo is 10,000. So 365 times 10,000 stars corresponding to the days of the year. And all this I created only for you, and you say I have forsaken and forgotten you. So you guys see the calculation there at the bottom, right? 12 times 30, 30, 30 times 365 times the 10,000. You guys can see the numbers. Now, again, here, we're not talking about is this number absolutely 100% correct according to what science knows today, because even science doesn't know exactly how many stars there are, right? It's impossible to count every single star out there. The way that they do it is it's basically they do calculations based on counting certain areas and then assuming that other areas have the same amount. Bottom line, it's an estimation. It's not an exact amount. But we see that, and space.com gives the figure. There's other figures out there, some smaller, some larger, that there's an order of 10 to 20, 10 to the power of 21 stars in our universe. Now, the point really here is in a time frame where the naked eye can only see, as we said, about 8,000, 8,400 stars. Okay. What it would be the basis for the Talmud to claim, hey, there's this astronomical amount of stars out there, right? I mean, they didn't have the technology. They don't claim they have the technology. This is a type of a statement that comes from as we're going to see as it moves on. Almost all of the information that the Talmud or the Midrashim are bringing are always things that are claimed to have been passed down through the generation. They never do the Talmudic sages claim that they had investigated this specific matter or that they had, the tools to do so. So again, here, I also don't want to get hung up on is this number exact, because the question would also be what does the Talmud classify or characterize as a star versus what would modern science call a star, right? So we could arrive at kind of numbers that are a bit different based on how you want to characterize a star and how the sages would characterize a star. But really, the point here that I want us to focus on to get us thinking in the right direction is that we have a group of people here that are basically saying, look, we didn't research this, but this is our oral tradition. There's a lot more stars, more a bigger number than you can imagine and count out there, even though their physical eyes could not see them. Okay, so that's one example. Let's move on to another type of proof, and this one is actually going to be from the Zohar. Uh, in ancient civilizations, early Greeks believed in a flat Earth, right? You guys have seen pictures online of how, but flat Earth or cylinder or cone-shaped Earth. Later on, there's different, like Aristophanes calculated the circumference, with that was pretty accurate a bit later. But overall, the primitive world, for the most part, didn't have they believed that the earth was flat because I mean it doesn't really make much sense to say you're standing on a ball that's upside down and you're not falling off, right? At later points in time, Greeks, for example, there was different arguments. They could see ships sailing away, that the ship wouldn't disappear all at once, and people began to that it began to be scientifically supported that the world was could be round or at least capped, at least some type of cap. But it wasn't until much later till this became scientific fact that was undisputed. I mean, it still could be disputed. I still know some people out there today that still believe that we've never been to the moon and that the world is flat. So, I mean, you can still find some people out there like that that believe that. But I want to read you guys a portion of the book of the Zohar, which is the Jewish Kabbalistic book. I'm sure you guys have heard the phrase before. Let's read here a portion from the Zohar, and we have about five different facts about our planet that is given in an ancient text. We'll talk a little bit about the dating of the Zohar because the date is a bit in controversy also, but I don't really think it makes a difference for the purpose of this piece of evidence. So this is what the Zohar says in Leviticus chapter 10 of the Zohar. The world revolves in a circle like a ball. Some people live at the base of the ball and others at the top. However, all of them stand erect. All of these people who live in different places of the ball vary in their appearance and skin color due to the atmospheric conditions. When it is night on one side, it is day on the other side. And there are places where daylight prevails nearly all the time. These secrets have been passed down to the masters of wisdom, the masters of the Torah. So let's take this apart. Let's take apart these statements and see what are the five different pieces of information. And again, most importantly, for the purposes of our lecture, let's go back and see what is the last line. The last line here says, these secrets have been passed down, not something that we checked, not something that they could have even had the tools to check in the time frames that they lived in. But these are the five things that this section gives us. First and foremost, it's very clear that the world is round like a ball, a spherical Earth. This was stated quite a few times in that passage. The Zohar also discusses how the ball is rotating, right? The Zohar talks about that the world, the word in Aramaic is Yeshuva mitgalgela kekadur. The world revolves in a circle like a ball, right? Not just that it's a ball, that it's also moving, it's revolving. The next concept, people are standing upside down on this ball without falling, right? So, I mean, they don't say gravity, they don't specifically talk about the concept of gravity, but the idea, as we saw in the graphic before, that we would be standing on a ball, even on the side of it at the top or the bottom and not falling, clearly goes against what, just basic logic would assume in those time frames. But they say specifically, we're standing on different sides of the balls without falling. The Zohar talks about climate variation and people varying in their appearance due to atmospheric conditions. It talks about other places that have completely opposite time zones as far as day and night, and even talks about places on the planet where daylight prevails nearly all the time. The first person to step foot in the polar regions, I believe, was in the year 1908. So that is, from a historical perspective, a very fairly recent discovery, these pole regions. And there's places even in Alaska, up in Prudhoe Bay, there's areas that you have, months at a time that are sunlight, months at a time of darkness. But we're talking about a time frame where these people were not living in those places. They'd never heard of these places, never seen these places. And again, they're not claiming that this was somehow brought to them by some visitor who lived across the sea, right? They're saying this is something that was passed down in our oral tradition. So,
When was it written in the Zohar, approximately?
so the writing of the Zohar is in a very big machloket. Machloket, it's in dispute. The Jewish tradition is that the Zohar was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai about 1800 years ago. Now, I don't want to get into the nuances. Hold on one second. We got somebody here in the waiting room. Let them in. So, because this is a good place to stop here. Also, we have another. Well, first I'll answer your question, Chaim, and then I'll come in to see there's a question here in the chat I'll get to in a second. So, to answer your question, Chaim, for the purpose of this discussion, I don't want to get into the different evidence for the Zohar being 1800 years old or 900 years old, because for the purposes of our discussion, it doesn't really matter, because 900 years ago, they didn't have all this information either, right? All these different things that the Zohar is describing. But there is a view, the most historians believe that the Zohar was compiled about 800 to 900 years ago by someone named Moshe de Leon, and that's because that's where we see the Zohar really surfacing more. The Jewish claim is that this text was kept secret for many, many years, and we don't deny that the time where it really became a lot more apparent and popular is about 800 years ago. But the claim is that this is a secret book that was transferred from generation to generation all the way back to the giving of the Torah. Now, the Zohar is different from the actual five books of Moses in the sense that for the five books of Moses, there needs to be a direct chain back to Sinai. You can't come and say, oh, well, it disappeared and we found it and all these things. The Zohar it's not something that's also binding in a halachic sense, right? We do not decide laws from day to day in Judaism from what it says in the Kabbalistic book of the Zohar. The Kabbalistic book of the Zohar really what it does is it points to the pnimiyut of the Torah. It gives us a lot of the much deeper meanings of things that appear in the five books of Moses. But it is really for somebody, the study of the Zohar is really meant for people that have attained a spiritual level, not like you see these days where you have these Kabbalah centers. And I remember there was somebody in Los Angeles, some guy teaching Madonna Kabbalah. That's really not the point. To really understand these topics, you have to be somebody that's really studied for many years the basics of Talmud, that your common sense and logical and rational thinking is very sharp. And then the only way to really study Kabbalah is directly from a teacher who studied directly from a teacher, and it's not something that should be offered in or could be even offered in online courses. So it's something that's really in depth. Now, again, for the purposes of our discussion here, it doesn't matter what date you take. To answer your question, Chaim, the Jewish tradition is that the Book of the Zohar was compiled by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai about 1800 years ago. Secular position would be that it's about 800 and something years ago. For the purposes of our proof, I don't know any history books that provide us this information from 800 years ago about a spherical Earth, people standing upside down without falling, climate variation, time zones, polar regions. If someone has some things, for example, the world being round, there were a lot of people that already had evidence from mathematics and from other arguments that the world could be round or capped, right? We talked about Aristophanes measuring the circumference of planet Earth already in those times. But in general, most of this was not something readily available. We're talking about people that believed in very primitive scientific theories in these times. It was almost widely believed across the board that the world was flat in this time period. So again, the point really here is that they're not saying we checked. They're not saying, right? The Zohar isn't saying I'm some really smart scientific person that checked this or have evidence for it. He's just saying, look, this is what was handed down. This is what was passed down. I'll read it to you guys again. This is what was passed down to the masters of wisdom, the masters of the Torah. And again, this is important because we're going to start seeing this in more halachic things that have to do directly with the oral law and the written law, things that we got directly from Sinai that make these same claims that we didn't investigate, rather we got them as an oral tradition. So let me get to, we have another question here from Leo. Yes, so Leo, I think I answered maybe. Leo, do you think I answered your question with my explanation just now? Or would you like me to
Yes,
further
Rabbi,
clarify?
that's fine. Yes, perfect.
Got it. Okay. So Leo had asked the question that was about general about Kabbalah and just some things that I just kind of discussed. So I mean, there's a lot more to it, but that's I think a basic overview that's good for right now because I don't want to get too much off topic. Um, but yes, the Kabbalah is a very, very important part of the Torah. It's a very important part of practice. But again, it's been sensationalized just like everything else these days because people don't want to actually sit and learn the dry laws. It doesn't sound too attractive. It's not Hollywood to sit and learn the laws of murder and stealing, right? People think, oh, I don't steal, I won't lie, I'll be fine. But what when you say, hey, you're going to learn Kabbalah, you're going to learn mysticism, right? We're going to teach you the names of the angels and how your name functions, like what the the astrological signs. People love these things. Why? Because it's a curiosity thing and they want to know what's going on in the upper world and in heaven. So things like this are very attractive to a day-to-day person who wants out of curiosity, but this is not the intention of how the Kabbalah is to be studied. The Kabbalah is a very, very deep book, and just reading from it, like online or just reading parts of it, you really don't understand anything. You need to have a lot of oral instruction from a teacher who really, really understands these concepts because we're really dealing with the secrets of creation and secrets of the soul and very, very deep things that were passed from generation to generation. So that was the proof that we just discussed from the book of the Zohar regarding planet Earth that justifies my background, right? Now we're moving on to my question here is also, and I want you guys to keep this in mind. We talked about this last week a bit when we discussed why would somebody fabricate, right? Now, remember last week I said that's not evidence, right? It could be somebody who made something up, and it's not hard evidence that somebody would make up something like the sabbatical year. But the idea here is always risk. We want to do always this analysis of somebody who is inventing the Torah, because we said either the Torah is divinely given or a man wrote it, right? We don't really have a third option. Either God gave it or he didn't. So, and if God didn't give it, then obviously human beings must have written it from however, and a group of people, one person. So it's either divine or it's not. So if somebody now is making these things up, right? You want to make sure you don't say things that could very, very easily be disproven, or else you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot, right? So we talked about that as regards to the sabbatical commandment. Why would you promise people that food is going to grow in the sixth year that's going to last all the way to the ninth year, right? Why would you do that? You won't be able to feed your army. It's going to be counterproductive. Nobody's going to want to join or listen to you to this religion or listen to you. And we said that it really isn't proof. But in this context, where we're starting now to talk about the evidence itself, it does become a certain part of a small part, albeit, but it is a part of the proof. The moment you have a finite statement, like we just read in the Zohar, right, that the world is round and people are standing on top of this ball upside down and not falling, and the different atmosphere, all these things that if not true, right, because they don't know, they're just saying this is what was handed down to us. They didn't check these facts. If it would have appeared in the end that the world is a big square or is flat, how would this look right now, right? So think about that as we start to get into some more things that are more practical for halacha, for day-to-day law that we have in our next proof of how would or why would somebody take the risk to make these types of statements. The next one I want to get into is the precision of the lunar cycle. And again, here, very important, the idea of oral tradition and how these things were passed down. What happened here is the Jewish calendar is based on the lunar cycle, right? And every month, what used to happen, now we have a calendar that's pretty much set forth for the entire, since from 2,000 years ago, we basically have a calendar that's in motion. But what used to happen back in the, I started not 2000, about 1,500 years. What used to happen back in the day, the way the Torah commands it, is that when the first sliver appears in the sky, two witnesses would come to the Bet Din, to the literally to the courthouse of the time or the Sanhedrin, and they would testify, we saw the first sliver of the moon appear. And based on that testimony, the judges would decree that now is the first of the month. And the first of the month, Rosh Chodesh, is very important for the Jewish calendar because it's a mini festival in itself. And there's special laws and certain things we do on Rosh Chodesh on the first of every month. And so it's vital to the Jewish calendar, the holidays. For example, Passover has to be in the spring every year, right? With you don't have an accurate calendar, the the time frames start to move around, right? Passover has to fall in the same time every year. That's why every 4 years we add a month in the Jewish calendar. So this is all very specific calculations of the Jewish calendar in order to keep things. So Yom Kippur, we fast on exactly when Yom Kippur is, etc. So I'm going to recount to you guys a story from Tractate Rosh Hashanah, which gives the laws of the new moon of this time frame. And again, if we look at this graphic, um, what happens is if you guys can see, I can maybe if I point with my mouse, actually, if I point with my mouse, I don't know if you guys are seeing it, but when we look to the left, you see how it starts as a very small sliver and slowly increases until about the 15th or 16th of the month, we see a full moon, and then slowly the moon starts to wane again until it disappears. So that first sliver all the way there on the left, that would be the appearance of the first part of when those two witnesses would come to court and say, "Hey, we've saw." Now they know more or less that it's going to happen here at around the 29th, 30th day, right? They know about when it's going to happen, but there has to be this eyewitness testimony. So here is something that happened, a historical occurrence that happened in the Talmud that is recounted as follows. One time the sky was filled with clouds, and a projection of the moon was seen on the 29th day of the month. Based on their observation, the nation thought to proclaim the holiday of the new month. Rabban Gamliel said to them, he was the head of the court at that time, "This is the law that has been handed down to me from my father's house. The new moon cannot be less than 29 and a half days, two-thirds of an hour, and 73 fraction, literally pieces of an hour." What he's saying to them is that I don't care what you're seeing in the sky. I don't care if you think you see the first sliver of the moon. We have, again, this is what he says, this is the law that has been handed down. What I've received orally from previous generation, what's been passed down to me, is that there is a minimum time. God created the universe and he knows what he created, and he gave us exact information of what the minimum time of when the moon could reappear, what in science is called the synodic month. And he gives them a very, very specific calculation. 29 and a half days, two-thirds of an hour, and 73 fractions of an hour. When we do the math, that comes to 29.53059 days. Very, very, very specific. They didn't say, oh, it's about on the 29th day. It's 29 and a half days, 0.53059. This is the law that's been handed down to me. So what he's essentially saying to them is that I don't care what you're viewing in the sky. It's been passed down for me from the highest authorities that the minimum time has not yet occurred. So regardless of what you're seeing, I'm confident that it cannot be. And then the Talmud then explains later, the story continues that the clouds went apart and everything. They saw that it really was just a projection and it wasn't, and the time really hadn't come. Now, when we look at these calculations that I provided, these are calculations that were done by in modern times, right? By very advanced technology, laser stuff on the moon, all sorts of things like that. Now, it is true that there is a similar Babylonian calculation that's pretty old, that is pretty close also. So I'm not going to argue that you can't come anywhere near these numbers during those time frames, right? I've heard lecturers say that before. It's simply not the case because they did have ways of very intelligently measuring things back in the olden days, even without lasers and scientific equipment. So there is a Babylonian calculation that is similar, but again, the reason why I think that this proof, this piece of evidence in our cumulative test, is so powerful, is because we are in the same motto of this is what's been handed down to me. The Jews are not claiming that there's some brilliant scientific minds that they calculated this somehow. Just like with the Zohar, just like with the stars, and like we'll see soon with the animals and with the fish, This is a matter of oral law that has been handed down because all of this information wasn't just provided so we can impress people, right? This information wasn't provided so in the year 2025, Ariel Moyal can write a book or do a nice lecture. This information was provided because we need these numbers and these figures in order to function as a Jewish people. We need them to create the calendar. We need to know which animals we can or we can't eat, etc. There's things that we need to know how to do, and this was provided to us at Sinai along with the written law and the oral law along with the written law, which is this very specific calculation. Um, so here you have here you see that the precision, the laser precision of the Torah really comes. It's actually the exact same number as the most recent study because these ones from NASA and Berlin are a bit older. This UK-US joint publication is one that I found just a few years ago. It's a bit older, but it wasn't in information that I had seen before. But it actually comes to the exact same, like right to the exact same calculation that the Torah comes to. So, as stated again, here we